Before the sun could fully rise, the low, mechanical growl crept across the fields like an approaching storm. The sound did not belong to birds or wind or tractors doing honest work. It was heavier. Colder. By the time the first light reached the windows of the small farmhouse, the ground itself seemed to tremble. When the widow stepped onto her porch, wrapped in an old shawl that still smelled faintly of her late husband's coat, she saw them. Bulldozers. Yellow steel beasts lined up in a half-circle around her land, their engines idling patiently, as if they had all the time in the world. This was the morning after she had said no. The morning after she refused to sell the only place that still remembered her name. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and standing up for what truly matters, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to channel name. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them most. Her name was Margaret Hale, and the farm was smaller than most people bothered to notice. 32 acres of uneven soil, a leaning red barn, a farmhouse that creaked in winter and sighed in summer. To outsiders, it was insignificant, a leftover patch of land wedged between expanding development projects. To Margaret, it was a lifetime compressed into dirt and wood and sky. She had arrived there as a young bride, hands soft then, eyes bright, full of plans that included children, harvests, and old age spent watching sunsets from the same porch. She buried her husband under the oak tree near the fence line after a sudden illness took him, and every morning since, she had walked past that tree, greeting it as if it were still him, standing guard. The offer had come quietly at first. A letter slipped into her mailbox with glossy paper and polite language, promising a generous sum if she agreed to sell. The land was needed, it said, for progress. A new industrial park. Jobs. Roads. Growth. Margaret read the letter twice, folded it neatly, and placed it beside her husband's old watch on the kitchen shelf. She did not respond. A week later, a man in a pressed suit came to her door. He spoke smoothly, gesturing toward the fields as if already imagining them flattened and paved. He smiled when he talked about numbers, but his eyes slid past her, measuring the house, the barn, the fence. Margaret listened, nodded once, and said no. The word felt small, but it carried the weight of decades. After that, the pressure grew. Phone calls. Another letter, less polite than the first. Warnings wrapped in professional language. She was told the land could be taken anyway, that resisting would only make things harder. At night, Margaret lay awake listening to the wind pass through the cornfields, wondering how something so quiet and faithful could be considered disposable. She thought of the mornings she and her husband had planted seeds by hand, laughing when the dog ran through the rows. She thought of the barn dances they had hosted for neighbors when money was tight but spirits were high. Selling felt like erasing him. Like erasing herself. The dawn with the bulldozers arrived without mercy. Margaret stood on her porch, heart pounding, as the machines loomed closer than they ever had before. Men in hard hats walked the perimeter, clipboards in hand, boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. None of them met her eyes for long. The air smelled of fuel and crushed grass. For a moment, fear threatened to buckle her knees. She was a widow, alone, with no children to stand beside her, no powerful friends to make calls on her behalf. The world had taught her, gently and then harshly, that people like her were easy to push aside. But fear did not win that morning. Instead, something older and steadier rose in her chest. Margaret walked down the steps, each one creaking as if protesting on her behalf. She crossed the yard slowly, deliberately, and stopped at the center of her land. The soil was cool beneath her boots. This was where she had learned to be strong, where she had survived loss and loneliness, where she had found purpose in tending things that could not speak but needed care all the same. She folded her arms, lifted her chin, and stood still. The hours stretched. The machines did not move, but neither did they leave. A supervisor spoke into a radio, glancing repeatedly in her direction. Margaret felt the weight of every second, the quiet threat humming around her. She wondered if this was how it ended, not with a dramatic battle but with patience on the part of those who could afford to wait. She wondered if anyone would notice if the farm disappeared overnight, replaced by concrete and steel. Someone did notice. It began with a car pulling up along the fence, then another. A pickup truck stopped, then an old sedan. Neighbors who had known Margaret for years, who had bought eggs from her, who had danced in her barn, who had waved from passing tractors, started to gather. They stood at first in small clusters, whispering, staring at the bulldozers with disbelief. Then they moved closer, forming a loose line behind her. No one shouted. No one threatened. Their presence was quiet, stubborn, unmistakable. By mid-morning, the scene had changed. Phones were out. Photos were taken. Messages were sent. A local reporter arrived, camera balanced on his shoulder, curiosity sharpening into concern as he took in the sight of a lone widow facing down heavy machinery. Margaret said nothing for the camera. She did not need to. Her face, lined by years of sun and sorrow, told the story better than words ever could. The company representatives retreated into their vehicles, making calls of their own. Progress, it turned out, did not like attention. Delays followed. Meetings were postponed. Legal questions surfaced. Margaret went back into her house that evening exhausted, her body aching, her heart still racing, but she slept more deeply than she had in months. The bulldozers left at dusk, their tracks scarred into the soil but stopping short of the house. The days that followed were not easy. There were court filings and paperwork she barely understood. There were moments when doubt crept in, whispering that she was fighting something too large, too powerful. But there were also casseroles left on her porch, letters of support, strangers sending donations to help with legal costs. People she had never met wrote to say that her stand reminded them of their own grandparents, their own roots, the places they had lost and wished they had fought for. Weeks turned into months. The case dragged on, then shifted. Environmental reviews raised concerns. Historical land use records surfaced. The small farm, once dismissed as insignificant, became inconveniently important. Eventually, quietly, the company withdrew its immediate plans. The offer letters stopped. The calls ended. Progress moved elsewhere, searching for land that would not resist. On a late autumn afternoon, Margaret stood by the oak tree where her husband rested, watching the sun sink low over the fields. The corn was tall and golden, ready for harvest. The barn door creaked in the breeze. The land was scarred but alive, and so was she. She understood now that saying no had not just saved her farm. It had reminded people, including herself, that dignity does not depend on size or wealth or power. Sometimes it depends on one person refusing to step aside.